this bill to the House.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. I just want to acknowledge the bravery and courage actually of Simon Bridges, who actually had the courage to, I think he's spoken in this House probably 50 times as long as any other member of the National Party, and I think that is utterly commendable. Now, we saw the whip's been on the phone, and I'll tell you something, Simon Bridges, Jerry's here, he's in big trouble, but we're going to stick up for him because he had the courage to talk in this House, and I think that's really good. But one of the things that he spoke about that said was the most important, and I'm sure Simon Bridges will nod it when I say this, it was about information sharing and the importance of information sharing. And what I'd say is that if the National Party had shared a bit of information over the last day or two, then the House wouldn't be in the shambles that it is today, because it is an utter shambles. It is a lack of planning and information sharing that has made the big joke that is happening. But I want to put on record, because I actually think we've got a pretty good relationship on our Select Committee compared to some, certainly that run by Sandra Gowdy, certainly that. And the one thing I want to say is the courage that Simon Bridges has showed tonight, that he has felt passionate enough to actually balk, to disobey the orders of just a short speech and put his hand on his heart and say, I feel passionate about this and I'm going to speak on it. And it's not often that I actually pay tributes to members of the National Party, but I'm going to be on record tonight in acknowledging the utter courage of Simon Bridges, who has spoken for probably, was it 5 minutes? At least 5 minutes, maybe even 6 minutes, when clearly the instructions were, sorry, Mr Speaker, to speak for 30 seconds. So it has actually brought quite a bit of the big guns, if I can call them those, but I think you know who I mean. It's called their attention in this House, but Simon Bridges has had that courage, and I think that everyone will acknowledge that, well, certainly from this side of the House. But now I want to return to the bill, the Customs and Excise Joint Border Management Information Sharing and Other Matters Amendment Bill. And like others who have spoken before me, Mr Speaker, Labor does support this bill, and as a member of the very hard-working Select Committee, I want to thank all the committee members, and I want to actually specifically acknowledge Sue Williams-Seo, who actually voluntarily came onto the committee. That's the sort of guy we're dealing with. He actually saw this bill was really important, and Jacinda Ardern was very kind enough to step aside and allow she was dragged aside. There was a bit of a dust-up between Jacinda and me, but in the end she stepped down, and Sue Williams-Seo was able to have the input. And in fact, I think if we look at the changes that happened during the Select Committee process, I think that everyone from the Select Committee would acknowledge the role that Sue Williams-Seo, along with everybody else, played. We all accept, or we all know, that the purpose of the bill is about information sharing, and that's something that Simon Bridges spoke very much about. Also, the improvements to the thresholds and the processes for administration and the offences under the Customs and Excise Act, and also other minor amendments that were providing clarity to the existing provisions. Whilst there was a number of minor changes, and I can go through those, I will go through them, Mr Speaker, if time permits, but there's just so much to go through with this bill. But the main change, the substantive change, and I think it would be the change that the committee gave the most attention to, was certainly around the making of regulations. And that was actually not a particularly comprehensive clause in the bill, but it was certainly after submissions and very careful consideration, and really the committee putting their thinking caps on as a whole and looking at it, that there was a recognition that that was the most important part. That, I think it would be fair to say, and I would look for Simon Bridges to acknowledge it, that was one of the most important changes. Before, the clause was actually just required the Minister, before making regulations, to consult with the Privacy Commissioner and some agencies that may be affected. But after consideration, some very good advice, points that were raised through the submission process, we, and by we I mean the committee, decided on having a much more comprehensive process for recommending the making of regulations under the section. And that was to actually make sure that there was consistency, whether those regulations whether they were going to be consistent with the purpose, whether the border information to be made available to an accessing agency under the proposed regulations included personal information, if it was to be made, who that information was to be made available to, the amount of personal information that was to be made available, whether it represented a significant a proportion of the border information, the sensitivity of that information, the level of accuracy, etc., etc. And I think the part of that was, of course, because the primary purpose is about sharing information, the safety of the border, acknowledging that anything that comes into New Zealand is either by air or by sea, so it's really important, but also acknowledging the rights of privacy of individuals. So that if that information is not necessary, is not essential for border control, then of course that information should not just be shared around willy-nilly. So I think that was the most comprehensive. That was probably the most comprehensive part that the committee gave its attention to. I can see again Mr Bridges nodding, but it was not the only part. Sagely and wisely nodding, but there were also other matters that were perhaps not quite as important, but still were matters that improved the bill, and that was there was the issue around the biofuels, which
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair. This debate is interrupted. The House is suspended until 9 a.m. tomorrow.